Week 6 is officially here, and today I got you guys covered with my top 40 wide receivers in the tier list format I bring you guys every week, along with some of my favorite picks over on Underdog at the wide receiver position for Week 6. But before we get into the tier list, we go through the will they play tier. And again, general rule of thumb, we'll kind of track their progress, see what's being tweeted about them on Saturday and Sunday morning. But the main two guys on the will they play tier this week are Quentin Johnson of the LA Chargers and Jauan Jennings of the San Francisco 49ers. And we have the latest update by Deepak over on Twitter for both of them. Starting off with Quentin Johnson, we see here from Deepak, data projects about a 2/3 chance of playing, and wide receivers tend to see a mild dip when dealing with hamstring injury. So it sounds like Quentin Johnson should be ready to go. You will see him on later in this video, and likewise with Jauan Jennings. With Jauan Jennings, we have his ankle/shoulder injuries he's been dealing with, and Deepak says that the data projects a 60% chance of play. When you combine that with the fact that the Niners already shorthanded, without Ricky Pearsall, without George Kittle in this game, if he can go, I do expect Jauan Jennings to play in this game. And like Quentin Johnson, you will see his name later in this video as well. And then there are two teams on bye week this week. Week 6 bye week, we're dealing with the Houston Texans and the Minnesota Vikings. If you have any players on those two teams, be cautious. Do not put them in your starting lineup. But moving on to the top 40 tier list, we have one clear name at the top of the mountain. His name is Puka, wide receiver of the Los Angeles Rams, currently averaging nearly 27 PPR points per game this year, and now gets the Baltimore Ravens defense on deck. When I think of Puka going up against Baltimore, the only thing I can compare it to is that meme, the hydrogen bomb versus the coughing baby. Hydrogen bomb, of course, being Puka, the coughing baby being this Baltimore secondary. I mean, it's pretty simple. Baltimore, they are the 4th worst defense in pass defense EPA this year, and they are bottom 3 in fantasy points allowed to the wide receiver position. We don't have to spend too long. Puka Nacua, he is currently on pace for a top 5 fantasy football season of all time. And I expect that to continue against this weak Ravens defense. It's really crazy with Nacua that we've come to the point where if he scores less than 25 points, it's considered a down week. If you have Puka Nacua, you probably got him at the end of the first round, and he is profiling into one of the best fantasy seasons of all time. But now we move on to tier 2, and I call this tier the next two. We have Puka up top, and then two guys close behind him. We have Amon-Ra St. Brown coming in at number 2 this week, going up against the Kansas City Chiefs, and we have Jackson Smith and Jigba going up against Jacksonville this week. We start off with Amon-Ra St. Brown. Sure, on surface level, this is a tough matchup. The Chiefs defense strong on paper. But with Amon-Ra St. Brown, it really doesn't matter. He's the wide receiver 2 in fantasy. He's averaging 22.5 points per game. And the Lions are implied for over 25 points in this matchup. It's the highest over-under game of the entire slate. And Amon-Ra St. Brown has been the entire engine of this Lions offense. He scored 18 or more points in his last 4 games. And if the Lions are going to be scoring on offense, it's more than likely Amon-Ra St. Brown is able to contribute to the cause. And at number 3, very close on Amon-Ra's heels, we have Jackson Smith and Jigba of the Seattle Seahawks, currently averaging 19.7 PPR points per game this year. And like Amon-Ra St. Brown, JSN, he scored 18 plus points in 4 of his last 5 games. And simply put, he looks like one of the best wide receivers in the league. And with JSN, this is also a great game environment, 5th highest over-under of the slate. The Sharps are hammering the over in this game. And with JSN himself, he has just simply taken that 3rd-year leap. His current pace of yards per route run would actually outrank 2023 Tyreek Hill. He's having a special season. Sam Darnold is playing some inspired ball. And if JSN's going to be as consistent as he has across the full year, we are talking about a high-end wide receiver 1 moving forward. With JSN, he's kind of evolved into Northwest Amon-Ra St. Brown, so it is fitting that they both find their way into this tier. But moving on to tier 3, I label this as the strong wide receiver 1s tier. Rome Odunze, Emeka Egbuka, Drake London, George Pickens, and Deebo Samuel consist of that tier this week, aka my wide receivers 4 to 8 in my rankings. We'll start off at the top with my wide receiver 4, Rome Odunze, and he has looked the part of a true alpha wide receiver 1. He has serious touchdown equity in this offense, and the Bears-Commanders game environment has the 2nd highest over-under of the entire slate. And the only concern that we'll have for Rome Odunze is that, yeah, he's getting valuable targets, but he's not really getting those layups. He's not really getting, the volume pad dig routes, crossers that we see guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown run. But at the same time, Bears, they do have their bye week in week 5. One of the main things that was working for them in the first 4 weeks is getting Rome Odunze the ball in space. We could very well see a second-year wide receiver really take the bull by the horns going forward, and maybe we start to see more 6, 7, 8 reception games rather than the 4 or 5 reception games that we've been getting. And when you combine that with the fact that Washington is a pass funnel defense and the Bears can't run the football, they are going to have to rely upon the pass game this week. And with Jaden Daniels applying pressure on the other side, I love Rome Odunze to cook in this game, and I love the Bears-Commanders game to shoot out this week. At wide receiver 5, we have Emeka Egbuka of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and he's kind of just the last man standing for this Bucs offense. Mike Evans obviously not playing in this game. Chris Godwin ruled out with a fibula injury. With Emeka Egbuka, we're looking at a rookie wide receiver that's currently top 5 in the NFL in both receiving yards and receiving touchdowns already this year. And after 2 games, the nerds, they wanted to sell Emeka Egbuka. I mean, look at his yards per route run. Look at some of these efficiency metrics. Since then, Emeka Egbuka has posted 3 straight games of 85-plus yards and 3 straight games with 22 PPR points per game in that stretch. With Egbuka, he's a stud. Tampa Bay has proven that they're one of those offenses you can never count out despite injuries. And when it comes to this matchup, man, Emeka profiles into a 10-plus target rule against San Francisco. The Niners, they've been good on defense, but Emeka Egbuka is good enough to simply win. When I look at Emeka Egbuka, it's truly reminiscent of what we saw from rookie year Amon St. Brown with Amon in that year. The Lions have injuries. Oh, there's nobody really there to compete for targets with him. People are going to do the same stuff with Emeka Egbuka. You just got to look at a talented rookie wide receiver that is going out there and playing well. With Egbuka, if he keeps playing this well, he will be the number 1 wide receiver for Tampa Bay moving forward. A wide receiver 6 for me this week, we have Drake London of the Atlanta Falcons going up against the Buffalo Bills this week on Monday night. There's no Darnell Mooney for week 6, and we saw the return of the slot for Drake London prior to the Falcons bye week. Drake London, he showed it in a big way, over 25 PPR points in the last time we saw him, and that coincided with more slot usage. You guys see this tweet from Josh Norris, but in week 4 coming out of the slot, Drake London had 5 catches for 81 yards and a receiving touchdown. Now we get a matchup against a susceptible Bills secondary. If London is going to continue playing in the slot, going to continue being that automatic out of the slot, we're looking at a situation where Penix is going to be forced to throw the football, and we're going to have to see the Falcons match blow for blow with this Bills offense if they want to keep competitive. At wide receiver 7, we have George Pickens of the Dallas Cowboys going on the road to play the Carolina Panthers, and since week 2, George Pickens has been the wide receiver 4 in fantasy with 20.7 points per game. And now he gets a game environment that we absolutely love for fantasy football. Second highest over-under at 49.5. Third fastest projected pace of play in this game. There's no CeeDee Lamb yet again. And we know with George Pickens, he's tethered to a great offensive situation. Dak Prescott, always a threat for 40-plus pass attempts, always a threat for 2-plus passing touchdowns. And with the way George Pickens has been playing, he shouldn't be viewed as anything other than a high-end wide receiver 1. At wide receiver 8, we have Deebo Samuel of the Washington Commanders going up on the flip side of Rome Odunze in that Monday night matchup. And with Deebo Samuel, man, he's nearly at 18 PPR points per game and the wide receiver 7 on the season. He's been flat out unbelievable, been one of those league winners in the mid rounds. And I expect that to continue in week 6 for Deebo. 17 plus points in 4 of his last 5 games, and now gets another game environment to shine. With Washington, 27 implied points at home, no Terry McLaurin yet again, and Jaden Daniels looked good in his return. I expect that to continue against this Bears secondary. But moving on to the wide receiver 1-2s in my rankings, aka the wide receivers 9 to 15, we have Xavier Worthy, Jamar Chase, Tetairoa McMillan, Devontae Adams, Jalen Waddle, Cortland Sutton, and Garrett Wilson consisting of that tier. We'll start off at the top with Xavier Worthy. There were some limitations, some question marks in terms of his status, but he was made full go for this game. And after coming back from his week 1 injury, he's come back to 17 targets in these last 2 games. Despite getting banged up in last week's game against Jacksonville, Worthy still posted a season-high 77% share of the snaps and 80% share of the Chiefs routes last week. Now gets a Lions secondary that was just torched for big plays against the Bengals. I'll bet, came in garbage time. We kind of see the Bengals really poured on at the end. But the Lions secondary has been susceptible all year, and Xavier Worthy simply profiles as the clear number 1 for a quarterback in Patrick Mahomes that's been playing at an extremely high level. And when you combine that with the fact that this is one of the most favorable game environments of the week, we love both these teams to put up a ton of points, and I actually expect the over to smash in this environment. At wide receiver 10, we have Jamar Chase of the Cincinnati Bengals going up on the road to play Green Bay, and he had his breakthrough game. Like I mentioned when I talked about Worthy, a lot of it did come in garbage time against the Lions, but at the same time, you love to see these plays happen, and we know with Jamar Chase, he is a threat to take any touch to the house. I really do believe in Jamar Chase, the talent. I just have my reservations that last week is going to be a constant moving forward, because with Joe Flacco, we have a volatile quarterback situation. 14-point underdogs against Green Bay this week. And the Packers defense has been stingy overall this year, but we're just hoping that Joe Flacco can be an adequate quarterback upgrade to Jake Browning. And wide receiver 11, we have Tetairoa McMillan going up against the Dallas Cowboys, and T-Mac is just so due for that breakout game. He's played like one of the best wide receivers in the league, but he just simply hasn't scored a ton of fantasy points. Like, you look at his target share, you look at his air yard share. I mean, the guy is a true number one wide receiver. 27% of the Panthers' yearly targets, 43% of the Panthers' yearly air yards, and yet that's only contributed to a wide receiver 27 point per game start, but that's mostly on the back of the fact that he hasn't scored a touchdown yet. With Jalen Coker active for this game, maybe taking some pressure off, and with the Cowboys being the single worst defense against the pass, I expect that to change this week. Tetairoa McMillan, he is scoring his first touchdown, and we are going to go and take that over on Underdog Fantasy, the higher on his 0.5 rushing plus receiving touchdowns projection. At number 12, we have Devontae Adams of the LA Rams going to play the Baltimore Ravens, and Adams, he's been more of a high-end wide receiver 2 in fantasy this year, but this is an extremely concentrated Rams passing offense, and like I mentioned with Puka, hydrogen bomb versus coughing baby, this Rams passing offense going up against this Baltimore secondary. Baltimore can't stop anybody, and Matthew Stafford is playing MVP level football. On top of that, with Devontae Adams, you have gotten double-digit PPR points in 4 of 5 games, and as we know, he's got big-time touchdown equity for Stafford in the red area. At number 13, and a big riser in my rankings, we have Jalen Waddle of the Miami Dolphins, and in his first game operating as that true number one wide receiver for the Dolphins, he commanded a 26% target share and a 45% air yard share for this Dolphins offense, and Jalen Waddle scored over 23 PPR points last week. And while the Chargers do represent a tough matchup, like they've ranked top 10 in defensive EPA against the pass this year, Waddle should get there on strict volume. 9 targets last week, and he has the skill set to take any single one of those targets to the house. Not to mention, when you look over on Underdog, his pick-em projection is currently at 68.5 yards and 13.15 projected half PPR points. The market clearly likes him. Jalen Waddle in this number one role for Miami, I think he gets there in spite of the tough matchup. And at 14 and 15, playing in that 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time kickoff game in London, we have Courtland Sutton and Garrett Wilson. Denver Broncos playing against the New York Jets, and we'll start at wide receiver 14 with Courtland Sutton. And Sutton has the clearly superior matchup versus Wilson in this game environment. Like, the Jets are currently bottom 3 in defensive EPA per play against the pass. But with Courtland Sutton, he is the archetype of wide receiver that we typically see Sauce travel with, just like George Pickens last week. With George Pickens, he only had 2 receptions going up against Sauce Gardner last week, but we did see one of those plays result in a 40-plus yard touchdown. With Courtland Sutton, he's got big play upside, touchdown equity for a 25 implied point Broncos offense. We have seen Sutton deliver a ton this year. He's been at over 17 points in 4 of his 5 games. And on the flip side with Wilson, I think he's both a better player and fantasy asset moving forward, but he clearly has the most difficult matchup on the field. Pat Surtain, no slouch on the other end. I would say at very minimum, he's the best corner in the NFL. And as we know, Garrett Wilson, that's going to be the primary assignment for him this week. Garrett Wilson, he's good enough to win on his own reps. He's the wide receiver 5 in fantasy at over 19 PPR points per game. But I do have some troubles forecasting this Jets offense. We have a low implied total, and with Garrett Wilson, he did most of his damage down 30-3 against the Cowboys last week in the 4th quarter. But moving on to the next tier, I label this as the wide receiver 2s. We have Quentin Johnson, Michael Pittman, Brian Thomas Jr., Marvin Harrison Jr., Ladd McConkey, and Jawan Jennings consisting of this tier. We'll start at the top of Quentin Johnson, and I mentioned with Deepak, he does expect him to play with that hamstring injury, hence the aggressive ranking. With QJ Man, it's pretty evident that he's in the midst of a year 3 breakout, and he is currently the wide receiver 8 in fantasy football. When you combine that slam dunk matchup, the second worst defense in EPA per play against the pass, we have a smash spot for Quentin Johnson. As we know with the Chargers backfield, Omar and Hampton, Najee Harris, they will both be unavailable for this game. For a Chargers team that was already number 1 in pass rate over expectation, so when it comes to Quentin Johnson, I am firing him up in my lineup. And spoiler alert, he is one of 3 Chargers wide receivers we will be talking about today. Next up with Michael Pittman Jr. going up against the Arizona Cardinals, and pretty simple here, 15.5 PPR points per game. He's kind of operated as like a poor man's version of what Courtland Sutton is. As we know with this Colts offense, been firing on all cylinders. Michael Pittman Jr., 4 touchdowns in his first 5 games this year. I guess the concern would be you haven't had that monster, 100, 120 plus yard type of performance. You're getting 5 plus targets. You're getting a guy who's been around 4 to 6 receptions each game. And like we said, he has monster touchdown equity when the Colts go into the red area. And at wide receiver 18, we have Brian Thomas Jr. going up against the Seattle Seahawks. And he played a lot better on Monday night than we saw in the first 4 games of his season. And now going into this week, the Seahawks are absolutely decimated. Julian Love, Devon Witherspoon, Tariq Woolen, they are all doubtful for this game in a game environment that was already favorable for BTJ. So with BTJ, we could be in store for his best game of the season in week 6. The big hurdle for BTJ so far has just been consistency of play. However, if what we saw on Monday night is what we can expect moving forward, BTJ is going to be a consistent riser on this weekly list. At wide receiver 19, we have Marvin Harrison Jr. going on the flip side of that matchup against the Colts. Kyler Murray is expected to play in this game after injury reports all week. And Marvin Harrison Jr. just posted another strong performance after what I'd describe as that flip switch game last week on Thursday. With Marvin Harrison Jr., 4 catches, 98 receiving yards in week 5. He's going up against his dad's old team. And we also have reports from offensive coordinator Drew Petzing that they need to get Marvin Harrison Jr. the ball more. And they didn't get him the ball enough in last week's loss against the Tennessee Titans. And Marv, he's more volatile than the other wide receivers around him in this list. But I do think he's got top 15 upside if he continues to play at the level he has in the last 2 weeks. Next up, wide receiver 20, Ladd McConkey of the LA Chargers. And it's clear that the target alpha #1 Justin Herbert wide receiver we were promised in the offseason, maybe not what's going to end up materializing with the Chargers. As we know, QJ, Keenan Allen, very real target competition for McConkey. But he's still, in my opinion, a top 15-ish level real-life talent. And in my opinion, he's due for the remember who I am type of performance. He hasn't had that yet. He hasn't had that week where he has been the clear wide receiver 1 for the Chargers. I think this could be the week this week. Again, I do prefer QJ. I do think you have to value what he's done so far this year. But with Ladd McConkey, you get Miami, and we know what he's capable of. Down the stretch last year, he was a top 10 wide receiver in the NFL, and he had that 9-catch, nearly 200-yard touchdown performance against the Texans. We just simply haven't seen it this year. Now you got this matchup with Miami, like I mentioned with QJ, second worst defense in EPA per play against the pass. I think this is the get-right spot, which is why I am smashing the higher on his 10.55 fantasy points on underdog. And finally, at wide receiver 21, we have Jawan Jennings, wide receiver of the San Francisco 49ers, going on the road to play Tampa Bay. And I mentioned it with Deepak. He is questionable for this game. We will have to monitor. Deepak's at about a 60% chance of playing. But in my opinion, if Jawan Jennings can play in this game, he will be playing, because we look at this 49ers offense. No George Kittle, no Ricky Pearsall. Brandon Ayuk still not clear to play yet. If Jawan Jennings is able to play, he will be out there and playing on Sunday, in my opinion. And if he does, we saw what the ceiling was in week 2 with Mac Jones. With Mac Jones, man, the offense hasn't skipped a beat. No Brock Purdy, but Mac Jones has come in and looked really good operating that Shanahan system. And I do think if Jennings is ready to play, he will be a target hog in this game, like we saw the last time he was fully healthy. But moving on to the next tier, we have the wide receiver 2-3s, Stephon Diggs, Chris Olave, Devontae Smith, A.J. Brown, Romeo Doubs, and Keenan Allen locking in this week. Wide receiver 22 is Stephon Diggs. Very simple. He has taken his game to the next level in these last 2 weeks. 40+% target share in each of his last 2 games, and he has been the clear alpha for Drake May. It's clear they've taken the training wheels off, they're letting him operate, and Drake May is playing like one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. I understand with Stephon Diggs, he's a bit riskier than some of the other wide receivers, which is kind of baked in as my wide receiver 22, because to be honest, if we can expect exactly what we've seen these last 2 weeks, 40 PPR points, strong stranglehold in terms of the targets, you could even argue that he's a top 15 wide receiver. So have him at 22, hasn't been consistent in terms of his overall snaps, but if he does get that full, 85+% of the route, 30+% of the target type of workload, we will be talking about a steady riser in my rankings. On the flip side of the matchup with Chris Olave, he's kind of just been sexless. Like, to be honest, with Chris Olave, you know exactly what you're going to get. You're going to get 10+ targets. You're going to get a guy who's probably going to profile 5, 6, 7, 8 receptions every week. But the touchdown equity in this offense is low. He hasn't really been getting big plays, and he's the wide receiver 25 on the season. So I think overall in this game environment, 21 implied same points. This is probably one of your better chances of him potentially scoring. But He's just sexless. Like I said, you're going to plug him in your lineup. You're going to be happy that he gets you, flex-worthy, high-end wide receiver 3, low-end wide receiver 2 level production. But is he ever really going to be the reason why you win your week? I guess we'll find out this week. And then back-to-back at wide receivers 24 and 25, we have the Eagles wide receivers who played on Thursday night. And yes, I did have Devontae Smith one spot higher in my rankings. I mean, we see even with A.J. Brown outproducing him on Thursday night, Devontae Smith still averages more points per game this year. However, I do think what we saw from Thursday night was A.J. Brown just simply playing better. And with A.J. Brown, the targets have been there. He's gotten consistent volume. He just wasn't playing well. He wasn't looking like the efficient AJB we've come to know. And if he continues playing like he did on Thursday night against the Giants, he will be a guy that will go back up to that mid-wide receiver 2 status. As for Devontae Smith, 4 catches, 49 yards, not what you wanted to see from him on Thursday. I do think he's more of a volatile high-end wide receiver 3, but with the Eagles throwing over 30 times in 3 games so far this year, that is an outcry from what we saw last season. Last season, week 6 on, only one such game with over 30 plus pass attempts. This year, we've already seen 3. So if we do see consistent passing volume, both these guys will be big-time relevant players moving forward. Next up at wide receiver 26, we have Romeo Doubs of the Green Bay Packers going to play the Cincinnati Bengals. Very simple why he's in my top 30. Last time we saw him on the field, he had 3 touchdowns against my Dallas Cowboys and now gets a cupcake matchup going up against Cincinnati. We know the touchdown equity he has in this offense. We saw it in week 4. On top of that, we have 94% and 87% route shares in back-to-back games for Romeo Doubs. It's pretty simple. He's a safe bet for wide receiver 1 on this team. We'll talk about his other teammate later on in this video who could potentially usurp him. But for the time being, he's a steady option. He's Jordan Love's ex-wide receiver, and Jordan Love has been playing some very good football. So I trust Romeo Doubs as a top 30 option with big-time upside like we saw in week 4. And then finally, my third ranked of the Chargers wide receivers, Keenan Allen. And you can make the case, you guys do see the points per game. Like with Keenan Allen, he's averaging almost 6 PPR points per game, more than Lamb McConkey on the season. However, when you do look at his recent usage, he only played on 61% of the routes last week. However, I do have to give him the benefit of the doubt. This is a cupcake matchup, and we should see a ton of 11 personnel for the Chargers moving forward. It's clear, without Amari Hampton, without Najee Harris, we will be continuing to see Justin Herbert air out the football. And in order for the Chargers to put their best offense out there, it's primarily going to be out of 11 personnel moving forward. That's the big change I see. And in order for the Chargers offense to get going, I think it's going to be on Herbert and these wide receivers to cook. But moving on to the next here, we have my wide receiver 3s. DK Metcalf, Zay Flowers, Jacoby Myers, Matthew Golden, Wan'Dale Robinson, DJ Moore, and Calvin Ridley this week. And we'll start off at wide receiver 28, DK Metcalf. He's made his hay in fantasy off of broken coverages, and he has touchdown equity on the Steelers offense. However, with DK, the consistency just simply hasn't been there route to route. We saw, for example, weeks 2 and 3. Didn't cross over 50 receiving yards, and he has only 1 game this year with 5+ receptions. However, it's pretty simple with Metcalf. They're playing against Cleveland on the road this week. The Steelers this week are 5.5-point favorites, implied for 22 points, and they cannot run the football in the red area. Also, what we know about Cleveland, they are one of the strongest run defenses in the league. I can see if the Steelers get inside the 10, inside the 5-yard line, they can throw it up to their 6'4", 235-pounder on the outside with DK Metcalf. We've already seen it this year. It's weird because he kind of operates more of like a tight end in fantasy football in the sense that you're not really getting that wide receiver level of involvement. You're not really getting that consistent 7 catches, 85 yards, 6 catches, 73 yards. You're not really getting that from DK Metcalf. However, what you're getting, touchdown equity, big time plays, and if he does end up profiting off that coverage bust, he can be one of the highest scoring wide receivers of the week. 29, Zay Flowers, and he goes up against the Rams this week. I really didn't know where to rank Zay Flowers. Like on one hand, I think from a talent perspective, I think from a consistency perspective, he should be higher than 29. But the Rams have a very strong pass defense. Saw what it looked last week in the first few quarters. They were really getting hamstrung by that Texans defense. And I think this Rams defense is even better. So Zay Flowers, I kind of view him as like a median outcome, where in the sense that you're banking on, 5 catches, 60 to 70 receiving yards like we saw last week. But given the fact that Cooper Rush struggled so much, is there really the scenario where he has the ceiling upside of maybe some of the other wide receivers? Like, my question really comes, is he ever going to win you a week with Cooper Rush as his quarterback? And to me, the answer is no, so I have to put some other options above him. Wide receiver 30, we have Jacoby Myers of the Las Vegas Raiders going up against Tennessee. There's no Bowers yet again in this spot, and the Ravens are implied for nearly 23 points at home. With Jacoby Myers, he really hasn't produced in these last few weeks, But to me, this is the get-right spot against Tennessee, with Myers a 25% yearly target share, and he is the clear number one wide receiver for this Raiders offense. Don't get me wrong, Geno has been awful, but I do think this is a potential get-right spot for Smith going up against the Titans. At 31, we got Matthew Golden of the Green Bay Packers. Pretty simple. I kind of went through it with Romeo Doubs. Romeo Doubs is the safe bet to be the wide receiver one for the Packers. If you like to have some fun, if you believe in the post-buy rookie bump, you can get there on Matthew Golden developing into that guy. He's got the profile, first-round draft capital, 3-level separator, operating as a deep ball threat for this Packers offense led by Jordan Love. We know what they're able to do in the play-action game. Matthew Golden is the type of wide receiver that can make plays down the field. I do give Romeo Doubs the benefit of the doubt. I mean, we saw 3 touchdowns, his presence in the red zone against the Cowboys, but I would not be shocked if the script flipped going forward with Matthew Golden taking over as the one. Wide receiver 32, we had Wan'Dale Robinson locked in, and let's just say I am very grateful for his performance on Thursday. I started him in the Flock League going up against Nathan, and we got over 20 PPR points from Wan'Dale. We did get a receiving touchdown. I knew, okay, no Darius Slayton, no Malik Neighbors. We could be in store for a ton of volume from Wan'Dale, but if you had told me going into the game that he got 6 for 84 and a touchdown, I would have fainted. So we're happy. Wan'Dale managers, we are up. Volatile wide receiver 3, but he gets there this week. Wide receiver 33, we have DJ Moore going up against the Washington Commanders, and he's just straight up been bad this year, but Loveland, he's banged up coming into this weekend. Luther Burden still doesn't have a full-time role in this offense, and God, the Bears cannot run the football. I mentioned this game environment for Odunze and Samuel, but we expect a ton of points scored in this Bears versus Commanders matchup, and DJ Moore, as we know, while he's not consistent, he can provide big plays on any given moment. Wide receiver 34, we have Calvin Ridley going up against the Las Vegas Raiders. He's on the flip side of that Jacoby Myers matchup, and we saw, a big-time flash from Calvin Ridley in Week 5. 5 catches, 131 receiving yards, and he now gets a Raiders defense that has allowed the 4th most points to opposing wide receivers and is bottom 5 in EPA per play against the pass this year. With Cam Ward, he just played his best game as a pro in the NFL, and I think there's real breakout upside for him in this game against the Raiders. So with Ridley, he is risky, but if Cam Ward does indeed break out this week, we are talking about a monster ceiling. But we'll breeze through wide receivers 35 to 40, aka the flexes this week. We have Kendrick Bourne, Jamison Williams, Rashid Shaheed, Travis Hunter, T. Higgins, and Cooper Kupp making out the rest of my top 40. Starting at the top with Kendrick Bourne, no Ricky Pearsall in this game. We know what Christian McCaffrey and Juwan Jennings are going to represent, but there are plenty of targets to go around. Mac Jones has been playing well. Tampa Bay is a pass funnel defense, and Kendrick Bourne showed what he was capable of in that Thursday night game against the Rams. 10 catches, over 140 receiving yards, and if it's only him and Juwan Jennings, I expect a ton of volume to come his way. 36, Jamison Williams. Dude, you got to prove it to me, to be honest, because with Jamison Williams, if you took him in the 5th round, if you took him even in the 6th round of your draft, you are not happy with the product you've seen. I'm giving him a sliver of the benefit of the doubt, because as we know with the Lions, high weekly ceiling, always going to be implied for a ton of points, great game environment against the Chiefs. But, buddy, we need more, man. 15% target share. I mean, that just simply is not going to cut it. You drafted Jamison Williams as a low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3, and he's averaging less than 8 PPR points per game. JMO, I'm talking to you. It's time to suit up. This is not going to cut it. 1 catch for 9 yards, that's not going to cut it. I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt, but if you go and blow chunks yet again, you're going to be hard-pressed to even make this top 40. Wide receiver 37, we have Rashid Shaheed going up against the New England Patriots, and he has been the wide receiver 2 in volume for New Orleans, but he has been the big play threat of this offense. Back-to-back weeks, a 35+% air yard share, and he had a top 10 PPR scoring week against the Giants last week. In this range, when you talk about volatile flexes, why not go with the one who's proved he's capable of scoring the long touchdown like Shaheed showed last week? On wide receivers 38 and 39, we have Travis Hunter and Cooper Kupp going to play each other in that Jacksonville versus Seattle game. We'll start with Travis Hunter. Listen, I understand. I took him at 411 in the Flock League. A lot of you watching right now probably took Travis Hunter. Are probably thinking, well, Danny, this is straight copium. How can you have Travis Hunter in your top 40? This is take lock, my guy. Let me convince you. With Travis Hunter, man, the issue with him hasn't been the ability. He's made plays down the field. The issue with him just simply has been the snap share. And we are hearing reports out of Jacksonville. They want to increase his usage. They want to be able to use him more down the field. We saw on Monday night him make that highlight reel grab against the Chiefs. I think this is the week that they do get him more involved, because as we see from this tweet from Dataroma, Travis Hunter does his best against cover 4 and cover 6 shells. And as we know with the Seahawks, they run the third highest rate of those coverages this year. Travis Hunter sees his targets per route run jump from 0.2 to 0.27, and he sees his yards per route run jump from 1.5 to 3.87 against cover 4 and cover 6. With Travis Hunter, we know the ability is there. Hopefully we see the snaps there, because I think he is one of the highest upside players of this slate. I wouldn't be shocked if this was a true breakout. 6 catches, 103 yards, 2 receiving touchdowns, and he plays his highest snap share on offense this week, which is why I am taking the higher on his receiving yards. 41.5, he smashes the higher. He literally just did that last week, and I think we see the true Travis Hunter breakout, and he scores his first touchdown of the season. And on the flip side with Cooper Kupp, not as exciting, but you're getting consistent involvement. 9 targets, 94% of the Seahawks routes in week 5. And Sam Darnold has been playing at a great level. JSN, don't get me wrong, he's the clear alpha here, but Cooper Kupp has established himself as the clear wide receiver 2. And if he continues to have high involvement games like last week, we could be talking about a legitimate wide receiver 3 moving forward. And running this list, it does feel disrespectful having him this low, but you see the points per game, 8.2 points per game this year. He's just simply not playing well. And yes, I'm talking about T. Higgins of the Cincinnati Bengals. Very tough matchup. We know the quarterback situation with Joe Flacco. He hasn't crossed 60 yards this year. What do you want me to do with T. Higgins? Realistically, it's a touchdown or bust type of option. He's a poor man's DK Metcalf right now. And for a 15.25 implied Bengals offense with Flacco, are we really all that excited to start a touchdown or bust Higgins? But either way, if you guys enjoyed, make sure you leave a like down below. Also, I mentioned my pick'em entry in this video. The last 3 videos, weeks 3, 4, and 5, my entry on this wide receiver tier list has hit in every single week. Of those 3 pick'ems that I've made, I've only gotten 1 single pick wrong. We're talking about 3 straight weeks of cashes. So if you guys are watching right now, make sure you tail this week's entry over on the underdog. You apply this 30% profit boost token, and you use promo code FSE to get started. The links are in the description. But with that being said, peace out. Let's win in week 6. Let's secure those W's.